Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Friday, January 19th, 2024. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today. Biden bombs Yemen again and says it's not working. So, President Biden acknowledged on Thursday that his strikes against the Houthis were not working to stop them, but he vowed that they would continue anyway. And the U.S. military bombed Yemen for the fifth time within a week, for the fifth time since last Friday. Listen to this quote from Biden. It's really something. He was asked by a reporter if his airstrikes, missile strikes against the Houthis were working, and he said, quote, "Well, when you say working, are they stopping the Houthis? No. Are they going to continue? Yes," end quote. So just a really amazing quote from President Biden, showing what a mess this whole thing is. And then yet again, more U.S. strikes in Yemen. So U.S. Central Command reported that it launched more strikes claiming to target Houthi anti-ship missiles. CENTCOM said, quote, "As part of ongoing multinational efforts to protect freedom of navigation and prevent attacks on maritime vessels in the Red Sea, on January 18th, U.S. Central Command forces conducted strikes on two Houthi anti-ship missiles that were aimed into the southern Red Sea and were prepared to launch," end quote. Later on Thursday, the Houthis said that they targeted another U.S.-owned ship, the Chem Ranger, which is a chemical tanker. The Houthis said that the attack resulted in direct hits, although CENTCOM later put out a press release on it that said the crew observed the missiles impact the water near the ship. So they're saying the missiles didn't hit the ship. The Houthis are saying that they did. Either way, it just goes to show the bombing is not stopping the Houthis. As Biden himself said, their attacks on not just American shipping, but just in general, their attacks in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden have really increased since Biden started bombing Yemen. Just a complete disaster. And the Houthis, officially known as Ansar Allah, have vowed that they will not back down in the face of the U.S. military. Ansar Allah's leader, Abdul Malik al-Houthi, said Thursday that it was a blessing for the Houthis to be in a direct fight with the U.S. He said, quote, "We praise God for this great blessing and great honor for us to be in a direct confrontation with Israel and America," end quote. Does that sound like someone who's going to stop because of these airstrikes and everything? No, it doesn't. And just the region in general, things have escalated dramatically. I mean, again, the whole purpose of this is supposedly to protect shipping in the region when way more shipping companies have suspended Red Sea transits. Insurance companies are turning down American and British and Israeli shipping that's going through this region. The whole thing is just becoming a disaster. And then the point that I always make when we talk about this is just the fact that the U.S. backed a brutal Saudi-UAE war against the Houthis from 2015 to 2022 that killed 377,000 people. More than half of those people died of starvation and disease caused by the blockade and bombing campaign. And what happened to the Houthis in that time? They just really became stronger and they got better at fighting and developed missile and drone capabilities. So, again, it just goes to show these strikes are not going to stop them, but it's just going to continue to escalate. I mean, who knows how far this thing is going to go? I mean, Biden doesn't seem like he's going to stop. You know, the Houthis aren't going to stop. So where is this going to go? All right, so the next one here. Israeli military chief says Lebanon war is likely in the coming months. So this article is from Jason Ditz. Visiting troops near the northern border, the head of Israel's military, Lieutenant General Herzi Halevi, discussed the potential of war in Lebanon, saying the likelihood of a conflict in the coming months is much higher than it has been. Lieutenant Halevi said he believes Israel will be starting the war with more advantages than in the past and that the lessons learned in Gaza will be applied to the situation in Lebanon. Tens of thousands of troops are reportedly being readied for the new offensive. So this is the rhetoric, basically making it sound almost inevitable. Although the big question is, can Israel handle opening up a big front like this against Hezbollah? They're probably going to need some help. They're probably going to need the U.S. to come bail them out. The comments echo those of Major General Uri Gordon, the head of the Northern Forces, who said earlier this week that he believes the troops are ready for the war in Lebanon and could start tonight if necessary. Gordon's comments came after an artillery and airstrike attack on the village of Wadi Saluki in southern Yemen, and he too was predicting tens of thousands of troops would be involved in this war. Halevi was explicit about the goal, saying that it was very clear that the military needs to allow Israeli citizens to return to their homes in the north, and that this would only be accomplished through a new conflict with Hezbollah. Hezbollah has been attacking northern Israeli villages in tit-for-tat strikes for months now and badly damaged an Israeli base in the process. They fired rockets into Israel after the Wadi Saluki strike, though reports denied there were any casualties, and most of the Israeli villages in the area have been evacuated. So Israel's saying about 80,000 of their citizens have been displaced by the fighting. And we've seen these reports, U.S. officials saying that they're worried Israel's trying to provoke a major war in Lebanon and that the U.S. would get involved in. So just another place where things could really escalate. And then the next one here, Al-Sudani says that the U.S. withdrawal from Iraq is necessary for security. So Iraqi Prime Minister Mohammed Shia Al-Sudani reaffirmed on Thursday his desire for the U.S.-led international coalition in Iraq to withdraw, saying that it's necessary for the country's security. So the coalition, known as Operation Inherent Resolve, is in Iraq in the name of fighting ISIS, although these days it's very clear the U.S. wants to keep its presence there, to push back against Iran's influence in Iraq. But Al-Sudani has repeatedly said that Iraq's security forces could handle the remnants of the terrorist group. He said on Thursday, quote, "Today, with the people of Iraq as witness, ISIS is no longer a threat to the Iraqi people," end quote. So tensions have been soaring in Iraq as Shia militias have been attacking the U.S. bases in response to Biden's support for Israel's slaughter in Gaza. And Al-Sudani has been calling for the withdrawal of U.S. forces after the U.S. began launching strikes in Iraq, launching airstrikes, including the recent drone strike in Baghdad that killed the deputy commander of the Popular Mobilization Forces, which is an umbrella group of militias that's part of the Iraqi security forces. So Sudani was very unhappy about that. He said, quote, "Today, after the aggression on the Iraqi security forces positions, we have to start a discussion in order to reach an understanding to form a timeline to end the mission of the international advisors and move towards bilateral relations in every sector, just like any other country in the region and the world," end quote. So Sudani, he's said this now several times that he wants the U.S. to leave. You haven't seen anything from the U.S. saying that, yeah, we're discussing it, we're considering it. They're determined to stay. And the reality is the U.S. has a lot of leverage, has a lot of power over Iraq. They can destroy their economy. The U.S. controls Iraq's foreign reserves. They're held by the Federal Reserve, and it gives Washington control over Baghdad's dollar supply and the ability to devalue the Iraqi dinar. And there's an interesting report in the New Arab, which I believe is a Qatari-funded media outlet based in the UK. And they cited a Iraqi source who they described as a member of Iraq's ruling elite, basically saying that Al-Sudani, political leaders in Iraq, know that they can't make an enemy of the U.S., know that they can't really get them to leave. So I thought this quote was interesting. The source said, quote, "The Iraqi government and the political leaders are better to know that Iraq is incapable of making the U.S. its enemy, because with one statement from the U.S. administration, the value of the Iraqi dinar will crash and the current Iraqi regime will collapse," end quote. And so this source went on to say that, I'll just read the rest of the quote. Quote, "Therefore, the Iraqi government always makes its position as balanced between the U.S. and Iran fronts and cannot align to one front. This is the best policy Iraq can adopt now. Iraq is not serious about exiting the U.S. and the coalition forces, as the Iraqi parliament has previously made a decision to expel foreign forces, but it never carried it out, end quote. And he's referring to when Iraq's parliament voted in January 2020 to expel U.S. troops over the drone strike that killed Soleimani and then the leader of the PMF at the time. I would say, I mean, again, Al-Sudani keeps saying this, unless this is just for domestic, to satisfy the domestic forces that really want the U.S. out. But again, he's been saying it so much, I find it hard to believe that he's not at least a little serious about this. All right, so the next one here, Netanyahu to the U.S., there will be no Palestinian state. So Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Thursday that he has told the U.S. there will be no Palestinian state in any post-war scenario, and that Israel must control all of the territory from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, which includes the West Bank and Gaza. Netanyahu said at a news conference, quote, in any future arrangement, Israel needs security control of all territory west of the Jordan. This collides with the idea of sovereignty. What can you do? End quote. So, it sounds a lot like he's saying from the river to the sea, which many pro-Israel people say that if activists say that it's a call for genocide, but when Netanyahu says it, I'm sure it's fine. So his comments came after Secretary of State Antony Blinken called for the creation of a Palestinian state, and other U.S. officials have floated the idea of linking Israel-Saudi normalization with the creation of a Palestinian state in the future. But Netanyahu has rejected both ideas. He said, quote, this truth I tell to our American friends, and I put the brakes on the attempt to coerce us to a reality that would endanger the state of Israel, end quote. A report from NBC News published on Wednesday said that the U.S. was looking past Netanyahu for any future arrangement, with one official saying that the Israeli leader will not be there forever. So that's apparently their thinking. Even though while Netanyahu's there, they're still going to give unlimited military aid, unconditional military aid, and continue supporting this slaughter that's happening in Gaza. So responding to that report, Netanyahu basically said he's the only one that can prevent a Palestinian state. That's how he's trying to sell himself politically, as his political career is in peril. He said, quote, whoever is talking about the day after Netanyahu is essentially talking about the establishment of a Palestinian state with the Palestinian Authority, end quote. So the White House responded to what he said and said that the U.S. sees things differently. But again, doesn't matter. They're going to keep providing all this military aid and other types of support, political backing and all that. So just more of this, we've seen this happen throughout these 3 months. The U.S. saying one thing and then Netanyahu just completely rejecting it, and other Israeli officials just coming out front and just rejecting the things that the U.S. says that they want. All right, so the next one here, Israeli president says that no Israelis in their right mind are thinking about peace. So this is Israeli President Isaac Herzog. He said on Thursday that no Israelis in their right mind are thinking about peace, as Israeli officials continue to make clear the onslaught in Gaza will not end anytime soon. So Herzog said this at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. He said, quote, if you ask an average Israeli now about his or her mental state, nobody in his right mind is willing now to think about what will be the solution of the peace agreements, because everybody wants to know, can we be promised real safety in the future, end quote. So his comments came after Israeli TV reported that Netanyahu said Israel's current assessment is that this operation in Gaza will continue into 2025. Israeli military officials have said publicly that they expect the fighting to continue through the entire year of 2024, and how many Palestinians are going to be dead after that if they start starving to death and dying of disease could be in the hundreds of thousands. So that's the situation. And I also included the genocide case, South Africa's genocide case at the International Court of Justice. They have to show two things: that Israel's carrying out actions that are genocidal on the ground, and they have to show that there's genocidal intent. And one of the quotes that they put in is from Herzog. If you remember this is from the early days. This was on October 12th. he said basically that there's no innocent civilians in Gaza. He said, quote, "It's an entire nation out there that is responsible. It's not true, this rhetoric about civilians not aware, not being involved. It's absolutely not true. And we will fight until we break their backbone," end quote. So again, that rhetoric that there's no innocent civilians, and then looking at what Israel's doing, the indiscriminate bombing, that's how they're making the case that it's genocide. All right, so the next one here, California senator says that calling for a ceasefire is dehumanizing language. So this article is from Kyle Anzalone, and this is Senator LaFonza Butler. She said that it was dehumanizing to call for a ceasefire in Gaza. So the senator was asked by LA Times why she hasn't called for a ceasefire in Gaza. And she said, quote, "I don't want my voice to ever be utilized in dehumanizing any Californian or American. We can both acknowledge the atrocities of October 7th were horrible and that Israel has a right to defend itself, while we honor the humanity of the innocent Palestinian lives that are being used as political pawns by a terrorist organization," end quote. So again, she's saying that this language is dehumanizing, calling for a ceasefire, not blaming all the Palestinian deaths on basically the Palestinians instead of the Israelis who are killing them. So then the LA Times, the question that they followed up with is, what is the language that's dehumanizing? Like, what are you talking about? And she said, quote, "To some, that is the ceasefire language, and to some, it is other words and phrases that have been sort of utilized in this context. To me, I want to focus on what is the solution that we can implement now and in the future to accomplish both goals," end quote. So it is really something how the idea of calling for a ceasefire when so many people are being killed is controversial somehow. All right, so the next one here, special rules keep U.S. arms flowing to Israel. So this article is from The Guardian, and they reviewed some internal State Department documents that basically showed that the U.S. has these policies to prevent weapons being used in gross violations of human rights. And I'm sure there's still plenty of cases of U.S. weapons being used for things like that. But they have this process where they review things, and then they're supposed to reduce aid or do something to make it known to the country that they're giving or selling weapons to. Hey, you shouldn't be doing this, But apparently for Israel, there's special rules, and that they've actually reviewed a few of these things, and the arms continue to flow anyway, unimpeded, at a very high level. And Israel is always the highest recipient of military aid until, recently Ukraine has topped them in the past couple years. But so I'll just read a little bit from the article, but it's pretty long. That's basically the gist of it here. And they have sources of former officials, and they have some documents that they looked at. But one of the incidents that they reviewed was the killing of Shireen Abu Akleh. I believe that was May 2021. She was a Al Jazeera journalist, a Palestinian American, a Christian, who was covering a raid in the West Bank or something, and she was shot in the throat. She was wearing a press vest and a helmet, says pressed, and she was shot and killed by the Israelis. And they initially denied it, but they eventually admitted it. And, doesn't matter. Let's still give the Israelis weapons. So this article says top U.S. officials quietly reviewed more than a dozen incidents of alleged gross violations of human rights by Israeli security forces since 2020, but have gone to great lengths to preserve continued access to U.S. weapons for the units responsible for these violations, contributing, former U.S. officials say, to the sense of impunity with which Israel has approached its war in Gaza. So they're basically saying because of the way that they let Israel get away with everything, and that they have these rules, that's what these former officials are saying is contributing to just how brutal the Israeli campaign in Gaza is. All right, so the next one here, Israel rounds up thousands of Palestinians without charge. This article is from Kyle Anzalone again. So the Israeli Knesset has approved legislation that allows holding Palestinians deemed security prisoners for up to 180 days without access to a lawyer. And this, they've been rounding up thousands of Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza. The number of Palestinians held in administrative Detention has increased from around 1,200 to over 3,300 in just 3 months, and a total of 8,600 Palestinians are now in Israeli prisons. And this is, we saw these pictures of Israel rounding up and making these Palestinian men and boys, some were children, stripped naked, and they would detain them. Now, some of them they brought back, but others, their families said that they've been missing. So this is part of it, these arbitrary detentions. All right, so the next one here, Pakistan launches strikes on Iran, killing 9. So with everything else going on, you got Iran and Pakistan bombing each other. So Pakistan said Thursday that it carried out airstrikes targeting militants in Iran, which came after an Iranian attack on Pakistani soil. Pakistani officials said the strikes targeted 7 locations used by ethnic Baloch. I believe that's how you say it. That's the ethnic group Baloch or Balak, Baloch. But anyway, these militant groups known as the Balochistan Liberation Army and Balochistan Liberation Front. Pakistani warplanes and drones hit targets about 30 miles inside Iran in the Sistan and Balochistan province. Iran condemned the strikes and said the attack killed 9 foreign nationals, including 3 women, 4 children, and 2 men. The Iranian Foreign Ministry said it condemns the unbalanced and unacceptable action of Pakistan in the drone attack on non-Iranian citizens in a village on the border wall of the 2 countries, end quote. So earlier in the week, Iran launched unprecedented missile strikes in Pakistan against Jaish al-Adl, a Sunni militant group that took credit for a December 15th terrorist attack against a police station in Rask, Iran, which killed 4 people. And Pakistan, which is a nuclear-armed country, strongly condemned the Iranian strikes and said they killed 2 children. Both sides are calling on each other to do more to deal with the militant groups that operate along the Iran-Pakistan border. So, judging on the statements that I saw on Thursday, it seems like both sides are like, all right, kind of cooling down. I would be surprised if I see Iran response to this. But both of them are saying that the other country has to deal with these militant groups that operate in this area, in this border area on both sides of the border in Iran and Pakistan. The Iranian Foreign Ministry said, quote, it expects the friendly and brotherly government of Pakistan to adhere to its commitments in preserving the establishment of bases and armed terrorist groups in Pakistan, end quote. All right, so the next one here, NATO to hold its largest exercises since the Cold War. NATO will launch major war games next week with about 90,000 troops to prepare for a potential conflict with Russia that will mark the alliance's largest military exercises since the end of the Cold War. This is General Christopher Cavoli. He's NATO's supreme allied commander in Europe. He said, quote, Exercise Steadfast Defender 2024 will be the largest NATO exercise in decades, with participation from approximately 90,000 forces from all 31 allies and our good partner Sweden, end quote. The drills will take place across Europe and will involve reinforcements coming from North America. He said, quote, this reinforcement will occur during a simulated emerging conflict scenario against a near-peer adversary, end quote. So Admiral Rob Bauer, the Dutch chairman of the NATO Military Committee, made clear that the drills were about preparing for war with Russia. He said, quote, I'm not saying it is going wrong tomorrow, but we have to realize it's not a given that we are in peace, end quote. So Bauer, he's previously suggested, I remember this from last year, that NATO countries should discuss the idea of putting their economies on a war footing, basically similar to what the U.S. did during World War II, where civilian factories start producing military goods and bombs and artillery ammunition and things like that. So that's kind of the way he thinks. And he said on Thursday that European societies need to be ready for a conflict. He said, quote, it is the whole of society that will get involved in a war, whether we like it or not, end quote. So since Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022 and NATO threw its weight behind the Ukrainian war effort, the Western military alliance has been preparing for the possibility of direct war with Russia despite the risk of it quickly turning nuclear. So last summer, the NATO alliance drew up plans on how to fight a war with Russia for the first time in decades that were approved at the Vilnius summit. If you remember, that was a big NATO summit over the summer. Cavoli said, for the first time in 30 years, we have the strategy, deterrence, and defense of the Euro-Atlantic area, and we have the plans to make the alliance fit for the purpose of collective territorial defense, end quote. So there's still... tensions are still very high, in Europe, in Eastern Europe with Russia. All right, so the last one here. China and the Philippines agreed to reduce tensions in the South China Sea. So hopefully this means something. This article's from the South China Morning Post, and it says that China and the Philippines have agreed to manage their disputes over the South China Sea and amid heightened tensions between the two rival claimants that have raised concerns of a wider conflict. During the latest bilateral consultative mechanism meeting in Shanghai on Wednesday, senior officials from the two countries agreed to, quote, further improve maritime communication and properly manage their differences through consultation to better deal with urgent situations at sea, especially manage the situation at Renai Reef, end quote. And Renai Reef, that's the Chinese name for Second Thomas Shoal, which is where there was, over the past year, a lot of encounters between Chinese and Philippine vessels. There was collisions, China firing water cannons. And the reason why this is so concerning for us is because the U.S. is a treaty ally of the Philippines and says that if this maritime, if Philippine boats come under fire in the South China Sea, the U.S. will intervene directly against China. It's just they're committing to war for these disputed rocks and reefs in the South China Sea. So hopefully these negotiations are, lead to some real reduction in tensions. During the frank and in-depth negotiations, the two sides agreed it was in the interests of both nations to maintain stability in the South China Sea and that keeping up communication was crucial to achieve that. The negotiations were co-chaired by China's Assistant Foreign Minister, Nang Rong, and the Philippine Foreign Ministry Undersecretary, Teresa Lazaro, while representatives of the respective departments of Foreign Affairs, Defense, Natural Resources, Environment, Transport, Agriculture, and the Coast Guards also attended. So there was a lot of officials there. So again, hopefully we do see a reduction in tensions. So that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our viewpoints. We have one from Judge Knapp, The Emperor's New Clothes, Biden's Illegal War in Yemen. He's been really good on everything, Judge Knapp. He has his show on YouTube called Judging Freedom, which is very popular. And actually, Kyle Anzalone, our opinion editor, who also writes news stories for us, has been going on there, which is really cool. Scott Horton's been going on there too. So go check that out. One from Kelly Vlahos, U.S. strikes Yemen again. Houthi attacks keep coming. One from Ramsey Baroud, 100 days of war. Palestinian resistance will be Netanyahu's downfall. And then one from Lenny Breutman, what Lai Ching-te's victory could mean for Taiwan's future. And one from Brad Pierce, we're now seeing the full extent of U.S. failure in Iraq. So please go check all of that out. That's everything for me for the week. I hope everybody has a good weekend. Let's hope that there's no more bombing this weekend. People can get a break, but unfortunately, that's not going to be the case in Gaza. We know that. But hopefully things don't escalate too much. Anyway, you could always support this show by sharing it, telling your friends, liking, subscribing, commenting, all that good stuff. But that's it for me. I'll talk to you after the weekend. Thanks for listening.